Right, so welcome to my two viewers. We are going to do a quick flight from Lajes in the middle of the Atlantic, and we're going to have a look at some tracking some VORs and shooting some ILS approaches. Using the Cessna 172. The reason for that is it's one of the only light aircraft that has conventional gauges. And teaching or doing a tutorial and this sort of stuff with jets is probably a little bit far on at the minute, especially whenever I'll be pushing like loads of autopilot buttons and that sort of stuff and confusing people. So thought 172 is probably a good option because it's quite slow and it gives plenty of time to see how things are working and see what's going on. So at the minute we're on Lajes on the ground, and I've actually got some approach plates which I will get up in a second. So hopefully you can see that, the approach plate that's up there, and I'll zoom in just to kind of show you what's going on. So this is an approach plate for Lajes, so it's out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and so you can see things here like the airport identifier, which chart it is. So in the book of charts it'll give you the number, so whenever you're talking to your co-pilot or captain, whatever way it is, then you can make sure that you're both reading the same chart. So we would use those to say we're on page 2-10, whatever, so that you're both looking at the same thing. So this is basically an airfield overview. So it is just showing you what's around the airfield, what's in the way of terrain. So this red circle here, this is your minimum safe altitude. So you see here it says 3.8, here it says 4.7, so that's 3,800 feet. Here it's 4,700 feet. So these are the different altitudes that depend on the airfield and the amount of terrain around it. You might have different arcs, different directions, whatever, but for this altitude or for this airfield, this is what. So in this area it's safe at 3,800 feet. You'll not hit any terrain. In this sector you're safe at 4,700 feet. The reason why this is higher is because there's a little bit of terrain here, which you can see this mountain, and I think there's an obstacle sticking up on top of it. So that's the kind of general airfield overview. You can see here you've got two approaches. So you've got an ILS, a Category 1 ILS, which is the fairly basic standard ILS, which has higher decision altitudes. We could talk about that a bit later. So this is runway 33, and you can see there's one here on runway 15, another Cat 1 ILS, and they basically the same strip tarmac, but the two different directions on the runway. So this is a holding pattern. You see these on charts all over the place. So this is at this waypoint Kogan. So this would be if you were in a kind of RNAV equipped airplane, like an airliner or something like that, something with glass screens that can see waypoints. So this is a holding pattern based on that. I'll not worry too much about that at the minute. So that's what the airfield chart looks like. You'll see on it as well, if I zoom in, you've got these things here. These are VORs. So this is a standard VOR. There's no DME attached to it. This is a VOR with a DME, and you can see that by the big D here. So that'll give you a distance as well from it if you've got the equipment to read it. Not sure if we have it on the 172 actually, haven't looked at it, but we'll probably just use the standard VOR for today, and then we'll see the distance on the ILS. Hopefully it's got a DME associated with it, although we probably won't see it actually because it's just standard gauge. Anyway, so yeah, that's the basic chart for that. I'll show you an ILS chart now. So this is standard ILS chart. This is ILS chart for runway 15, so coming in from the northwest, and this is ILS 33. So we'll probably end up doing 15, I think. There's no wind, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, so the standard ILS chart, same sort of things again. It'll say the airfield codes, and then your chart reference as well. So this is 7-10 airport frequencies. So the 8 is frequency for the weather, approach frequency, tower frequency whenever you get close in, ground frequency whenever you're on the ground. This is the ILS runway, and this is the ILS frequency 109.9. So we would put that into our radio here, and yeah, so you've got some notes and stuff which we'll not worry about, but you normally have a few notes around charts, especially if they've been updated and things. And this is transition level and transition altitude. So this is altitude that you would change to standard pressure setting on the way up, and then transition levels on the way back down again whenever ATC will assign you an altitude. So that's 5,000 feet there that you would go on to standard pressure setting for your altimeter. Don't really need to worry about that at the minute. Other things that you see on the charts are your distances to run and what altitude. So these are your distances. This is 11.1 DME based on this TRM. So these distances are referenced to that. So there's no actual frequency. There's no DME actually on the ILS itself. So it's based on a VOR. There's probably a note to say, yeah, DME or radar required. So if you were doing this in real life, you'd need one or the other. So yeah, these are the reference points at which you need to be at these altitudes, or they act as a check to make sure that you're on the right glide slope and you're not on a false glide slope. Not something you really need to worry about in Flight Simulator. There shouldn't be too many false glide slopes going around. This tells you which runway you're landing on, the runway distance, and the runway width. So 60 meter wide runway, it's quite wide. 3-degree poppies. So you see those lights at the side of the runway, which you might have seen before, which tell you if you're on the glide slope or not. And so actually this is a 3-degree poppies, but the approach is 3.12, so it's a little bit steeper than what the poppy are aligned with. So that would be something to be aware of if you were doing it in real life. These are the points for the approach, and then this is the missed approach point, which is 1.7 miles. Actually, because it's an ILS, you would just go down to decision altitude, and if you didn't see anything, you would just go around. This is your missed approach, so your procedure. On this one, it's just go out 151 heading from the TRM to Cuddly, which is this waypoint, climbing to 4,000 feet. So you just climb straight ahead, track this VOR out to Cuddly at 4,000 feet and enter the hold. So that is pretty much the charts, and we'll take off now. We'll program the VOR first. So if we go back to the AFC chart, I mean, it's a really quick kind of overview of the charts. They're pretty full of information, and it takes a while to kind of get your head around them. Eventually you just kind of look at them and you can pick out the things that you need, and you don't really get too confused or anything, but yeah, they can be quite confusing the first few times you look at them. So I have already tested here and tried to put in this 116.2, but for some reason Flight Simulator doesn't seem to be bringing anything up for that. So we're not going to have a DME to use, but we can use 112.3 for the VOR later. So if I go back to Flight Sim and put in 112.3, these knobs are so fiddly in this game. Right, so we've made that the active frequency by putting it there. You can see that it's started receiving something because it's saying that it's got a nav signal. It's come up with 2 flags. So normally if there was nothing there, you'd have this fail flag, but fail flag has cleared and you get 2 side, and I'll put that onto nav from GPS. So this is just basically a button to say, don't want to use the GPS, I'm going to use my radio frequencies and stuff, do it the old school way. So we'll take off first, and then we'll do some VOR tracking. As you can see, the weather's pretty pants. Didn't think there was any wind, but it actually feels very windy. Right, so we'll climb straight ahead. And we're just going to keep speed around 70 knots. We've trimmed for that. And we're going to try and keep 330 when the heading below. I'll put the heading bug, whenever you're tracking a heading, it's good to put the bug where you want to track it. Kind of makes it a bit easier to see if you've gone off or anything. Okay, so you can see we've been tracking away from the airfield, and so now we've got the VOR frequency in. It's getting a signal from it. It's telling us that we're going away from the VOR, this triangle. If we turn this to the direction that we're heading, we'll get more kind of true information off it. So you can see whenever I turned it that that this line moved across, and that was basically telling us that if we travel in this direction, because we're going this way, we would go back towards the VOR. So in a VOR, it kicks out 360-degree radials, so one radial every 1 degree. So you can see all those radials would be on here. So, and we're going away from the VOR, and this line matches up. So we're on about the 335, 336 radial away from the VOR. So if we wanted to track to the VOR again, we could turn onto the 155 radial, and that would bring us straight back. So let's do that. So we're going to track this 155 radial back to the VOR. So turn the heading bug. Aircraft turns because the autopilot's on. And what I've done is I've overshot it a little bit because it probably is going to need to, because we turned, it's going to have to come back again. So if I change this, right, so I said the 155 radial, so if I put the 155 radial on top now, and I'll turn this back on the 155. Things are a bit slow with a mouse. In real life, whenever you're turning these knobs, it's pretty much instant to get it where you want to, but flight sim takes ages. So you should see that line move across shortly. So there it is. So you can see we're actually on about the 162 radial now. So we're going towards the VOR. If we wanted to, so if we want to get back onto that, say we want to get onto the 150 radial, so you put that to 150, turn right. So now this is telling us where we are relative to the 150 radial. So because this line is displaced out to the right, that means fly right. So we're going to fly right. And it's important to remember whenever you're trying to intercept these VORs, how big your angle is between what direction the radial is. So this is the radial's direction whenever we intercept it, and this is the direction that we are flying. So we need to consider how big a turn we have between here and here. If you put too large an intercept on, you'll never intercept it, you'll just fly straight past it. There's the radial moving now. So the radio's starting to come in. That means we're going to have to turn back again. So if I turn to re-intercept it, and it's the 150 radial, so we'll go 150 for now, and then we'll have to adjust if there's any wind corrections. So that was a little bit quick. So I'll go something like 170. And you'll see it slowly sneak in, moving really slowly. So if you wanted to speed that up, you could put more of an intercept on. It's worth noting as well, as you get closer to the actual VOR itself, the movements become more fast, so everything becomes faster, and it becomes a lot more sensitive. I think we might actually have some wind on here as well, but I haven't quite figured out what the actual wind is yet. So that's a pretty close now. So we're now actually tracking this radial. So if we were to drift off course, if this bar went out to the left, we would turn left to get back on it. If the bar went out to the right, we would turn right to get back on it. If it was a from indication instead of a to indication, then the movements are reversed as well. So you need to basically have this pointer in the direction that you want to go, and have a to flag. It makes things much simpler. So you can see it's starting to get really sensitive now. That's because we're going overhead the VOR. So it's getting really sensitive. So we're probably really close to it. If we look at the chart, yeah, we are. The VOR is basically right here. That's it there, Lima Mike. So we've just flown over the top of it. You saw the movement, and now we're going away from it again. So as soon as we went overhead, this indications changed around, and now it'll get less sensitive as we get further away from it again. And that's basically VORs. As long as you are tracking in the direction and you've got your course line set up in the direction you're going to, it makes tracking a VOR much easier because you can just fly the direction of the line. And that's generally the way they would tell you to have everything in airline flying. It avoids any confusion if you have the arrow pointed in the direction that you want to go, and it makes the course corrections in the right direction instead of reversing things. So that's one thing to do. And this is basically a really basic instrument. So it's exactly the same in a 747 or an A320 or whatever you're in. There is VOR modes, and they work in exactly the same principle as this. It's just on a fancier screen and on a fancier display. Same with the G1000 and anything else. But if you crack using this thing, then you can basically use anything. This down below is exactly the same. So this has a horizontal tracking, so like directional along the kind of ground, and then this is a vertical line for if you were doing an ILS approach. So this instrument can do an ILS approach, which is what we'll use for doing that. But this is only one direction, so it could do a VOR approach or something like that if you had one. I did have a look for a VOR approach, but I couldn't find any, so I'll maybe do one in another video. But yeah, so what we'll do is we will show you that working. So we'll go on here and we'll put 112.3 on there. So you flick it over, and there you go, it's picked up the signal. And if I put 150, so slow, come on. So much easier having real buttons and stuff in real life. Then you'll see that line comes in, and it's just exactly the same as the other. So that's that. Really straightforward. Let's do one more turn towards the VOR. So let's say this time we want to pick up the 180 radial. So if I want to pick up the 180 radial, that means the 180 radial comes out from the VOR. So it's the reciprocal of that we would want to travel up. So we want to set this to 360, which is north. So if I set this to 360, so there's a bit of situational awareness required on what your position is and relative to everything else, because as you can see at the minute we're getting kind of incorrect signals for what we want to do, but I know that I would need to turn to the right to intercept this. So this is the thing with instrument flying as well, you've always got to be thinking about where you actually are. You've got to be really aware of what your position is with regards to terrain and stuff like that. And so actually here we know that I'm below the MSA for this area, because this area was 3,800 and we're only at 2,000 and we're in IMC, so we can't see. Well, is that ground? No, it's not ground. So yeah, we're in IMC, so we can't see anything. So it would definitely be worthwhile trying to have a good idea of what your position is. You can see on the chart actually there's a little peak at 2,000 feet, so we're going to get quite close to that whenever we're tracking in here. So I'll maybe just sneak it up a bit. There's the bars moving in now, you can see them moving. So I'll go to about 330, something like that for now. Turns quite quickly this actually, so it's quite easy to get it onto. And then I'll just maybe start clicking it slowly. And we're also coming up to our altitude as well, so hopefully the autopilot will do its thing. I'm not really quite sure about this autopilot though, so it's a bit trial and error at the moment. Yeah, so it's leveling out at 3,000 feet, doing exactly what we wanted it to. Just gonna bring the power back again to 2200 or thereabouts. And that little bar is just slowly creeping in. So we know that that was where it was, but if we didn't have this, then we would still know that we were about to head towards it again. If we had a DME as well, so if all we had was this and a DME, we can find out what radial we were on. If we were over here, we can turn this until it lines up, work out what radial we're on, and then you know the distance, so you can go onto your chart, work out what radial you're on, what distance you're at, and you can plot your position. If you've a couple of VORs and no DME, you can also plot your position, but it's much easier with a DME. Right, so what we're going to do now, we're going to go overhead this Lima mic, and then I'm going to go out on the radial for the ILS, so I'll try and get the ILS chart up. Probably going to miss it now because I'm too late. Right, ILS 15. So now we're going to fly out on the 151 radial. So I'll keep this for now here, and we'll set this to 151. And this is part of IFR flying, is managing your radios and managing what dials you're using when, and getting the next one set up so that you can switch to it whenever you need it. So probably a bit late doing this. but there's 151, so that's what we're going to intercept after we pass Lima Mike. And then really it should have the ILS frequency in already. So it's 109.9. So we're just passing overhead. There's the full deviation on the VOR now, and this will switch. There we go. Should have turned already, but we'll turn now. We'll take a 151 heading for now, and then no, sorry, it should be the reciprocal of that. 330. How many to set this to? 330 or thereabouts. Come on, so slow. Right, so there we're tracking out now on this 330 radial, coming up to the northwest. And we're set the frequency up for the ILS now, so that's 109.9. So we're tracking on this bottom one, which is nav 2. So we're going to set nav 1 for the ILS, which is what we need for it because it's associated with this. Right, so there we go. There's ILS frequency on. You can see now we've got a glide slope deviation as well, so it's telling us that we're really high because we're still quite close in the runway. There isn't necessarily a procedure with this ILS to getting onto it, so basically we don't have any DME either, so we'll keep it really simple. We'll just fly out to a distance where the ILS glide slope flies above us, and then we'll turn around, re-intercept the glide slope, intercept the ILS, and fly down it. There is an approach mode on this, but I'm not sure if it works, but we'll try and get it to work. By approach mode, what I mean is the autopilot will fly the ILS, so it should intercept the localizer, intercept the glide slope, and fly at all fours. So now we've got the ILS frequency in. The other important thing to make sure is that you've got the inbound course for the ILS set correctly. So here you can see inbound course is 151. So we'll put 151 on the VOR radial. You can actually see on the GPS, just saw this while I was doing that, there's position Turco. You can see that on the chart as well. So there's Turco there, so it's quite good. It's got these waypoints actually in here. And you can see how inaccurate VORs are as well. Once you get further and further away from it, it becomes more and more inaccurate. So the radials get wider the further you go away, so you can be more and more off course. So we'll set this 151. So you can see now we're at what position? Apodi, which is 12.5 miles away, and we've got a fly up indication. So I'd say we could probably turn around. So what we'll do is we'll do a slight turn to the right, and then we'll swing back around to the left, and then that'll get us onto the ILS. So we're coming in, we're left of the localizer, which is the horizontal antenna for the ILS. So we would expect to have to fly to the right to intercept it. So yeah, that is correct sensing. There it is coming in now. So if I set one runway heading now, should start flying down ILS. I'm gonna try hitting approach and see what happens. I'm not sure if it'll keep tracking it or not. Might track this. So in an airliner, you would have hit localizer mode, and it would have the autopilot would start tracking the localizer, and then later on we would, whenever we're cleared to descend with the ILS, descend with the glide path, we would arm glide slope mode, and then whenever the glide slope comes down to our altitude, as we get closer to the runway, the autopilot will lock on it and descend on both, and that's what we normally use ILS to get to the runway. So I've reset this now to 151 because I know that's a runway heading on the localizer inbound course, and we're on the localizer inbound course. So there's the glide slope coming down now, so let's see if the autopilot will capture it. Because we're only doing 100 knots, we're in a 172 going really slowly. It's taking a while to come down. If you're in a faster plane, if you're in a 737 or a jumbo or whatever, this will come down much faster. Depending on your ground speed, obviously. And let's see if the autopilot does anything. Oh, yep. So now I'm going to have to take the power back because we don't have any auto throttle. So it's descending on the ILS, but I'll have to reduce the power myself to maintain the airspeed. So normally we would be looking at our DME, and we would be assessing how far away we were from the point. Let me see if I can get a DME up. I don't think I can, but I'll try this TRM, which is 116.2. Nah, so if we did have a DME, oh yeah, it is 116.2, yeah. So if we did have a DME, if this VOR was working, I would expect that to say the distance here, but there's no distance there, so just says our ground speed was 115 knots, and our ground track, which is 151, which is what you'd expect considering the inbound course for the ILS is 151. So a bit unfortunate the DME is not working, but don't know why that VOR is not mapped in Flight Simulator, unless it's new maybe. So now we're basically just flying down ILS, so there's nothing really to do. The next thing to think about really, we would have done a check altitude if we had a DME, so we would have said at 5 DME we would have been at 1490 feet, which probably would have been about now. So we're just passing 1500, but we can't do that because we don't have a DME, which you would have required for this procedure, but this is not real life. So the next thing to consider is our decision altitude. So this has only got Cat C and Cat D airplanes, which are 737s and 747s, that sort of thing. So not really applicable to us, but in a Cessna, which I think we're Cat A airplane, but it's not on here anyway. So if we say the decision altitude was 410 feet, what that means is we're going to fly down to 410 feet, And if we don't see the runway, which we do already, well, it might disappear again. So if we don't see the runway, then we would go around. But I suspect we'll see the runway. But it might actually disappear again as we go through this next layer of cloud. So let's start bringing the power back. We'll let the autopilot trim. And you can see 2 red, 2 white, so it's flying the glide slope perfectly. I'll put 1 stage of flap. No, I'll not. They already had 1 stage of flap that whole time. We'll put another stage of flap then. Oh dear. That's what happens when you don't do your after takeoff checklist. So I gotta fly about 70 knots until kind of the last 500 feet. I'll probably put another notch of flaps down. Graphics are really cool. Tell you what, I'm gonna fly the last little bit. So autopilot's off. I'm following the glide slope, so it's saying you're a little bit high, fly down. So I'm following that bar down. Looks pretty good now. A little bit bumpy. So now, as you get closer and closer to the ILS, it's going to get more and more sensitive. So you can see that bar really shoots around with every move of the aircraft. Got to take the power back again. I'm going to put in the last stage of flap. I'm going to keep flying down on the glide slope, hopefully, which I'm losing. And as we get to touchdown points now, which is what we're looking at, we're going to leave the glide slope and we're going to flare. And hopefully we're going to touch down. Here we go. And we're going to shoot off because my rudder pedals are all messed up. That's okay. Bring it to halt. Set a park brake. So yeah, that was basically very basic VOR intro, ILS intro using this little thing, and yeah, it's all pretty basic, but probably a decent introduction. Hopefully I haven't confused you too much. So if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them. I'll probably do another video later on which is a bit more detailed. Maybe do a couple of VOR approaches on something which is a bit more modern, so maybe an airliner or something like that. Yeah. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye bye.